vous en prie. Mesdames, Messieurs les ambassadeurs, Monsieur l'ambassadeur d'Israël, Monsieur le délégué général palestinien, mevrouw de minister, heren ministers, chers collègues, waarde collega's, Mesdames, Messieurs, dames en heren. Het is voor de Senaat een eer en een voorrecht om in zijn midden een uitzonderlijk prominent figuur te mogen ontvangen, de heer Shimon Peres, gewezen eerste minister van Israël en Nobelprijs voor de Vrede. Ik ga nu verder in onze andere landstaal, een taal die de heer Peres beheerst. Le Sénat a l'honneur et le privilège d'accueillir en son sein une personnalité exceptionnelle, Monsieur Shimon Peres, ancien Premier ministre d'Israël et Prix Nobel de la Paix. Un sage grec, interrogé sur la différence entre la guerre et la paix, répondit « En temps de guerre, ce sont les pères qui enterrent leurs enfants, là où en temps de paix, ce sont les enfants qui enterrent leurs pères. » Ce n'est pas par hasard que je relève cette citation dans un article qui vous était consacré. Elle est plus que jamais d'actualité dans les semaines tragiques que vit le Moyen-Orient. Cher Monsieur Shimon Peres, depuis plus de 50 ans, votre destin s'identifie à celui d'Israël. Vous avez été successivement directeur général du ministère de la Défense, député, ministre, chef de parti, chef de l'opposition, chef de la diplomatie de votre pays et par 2 fois Premier ministre. En 1992, dans le gouvernement de feu Yitzhak Rabin, vous avez conduit à Oslo les négociations qui aboutiront à la signature des accords de paix, dont nous espérons toujours la concrétisation. C'est cet engagement pour la paix au Moyen-Orient qui vous a valu en 1994 le Prix Nobel de la paix, aux côtés d'Yitzhak Rabin et de Yasser Arafat. Nous savons que vous êtes persuadés que la paix avec les Palestiniens et avec les pays arabes est la condition sine qua non pour le développement de votre région et la prospérité de ses peuples. Cette paix implique un État palestinien accompli, moderne, démocratique et prospère. Visionnaire, parfois mal aimé, après avoir consacré la moitié de votre vie à organiser la défense et la sécurité d'Israël, vous êtes devenu, en 1977, suite à la visite historique du président égyptien Sadat à Jérusalem, un infatigable avocat de la paix, convaincu que la sécurité d'Israël ne peut se construire par les armes, mais bien grâce à un accord de paix équilibré et juste. Homme d'État, vous avez défendu vos vues et électoralement, vous en avez parfois payé le prix. Pour vous, un rôle pacifique d'Israël doit contribuer à la renaissance d'un Moyen-Orient pacifié, dynamique et cultivé, d'un Moyen-Orient qui connaîtrait la compétition et non la domination, qui ne serait plus une terre de conflit, mais une zone de créativité et de croissance. En un mot, un Proche-Orient où l'on serait l'hôte de son voisin et non son otage. Monsieur le Premier ministre, vous nous faites l'honneur de votre visite au lendemain du sommet de Charm-El-Cheikh. La Belgique, pays fier de ses traditions démocratiques, adopte face à la situation au Moyen-Orient une position qu'elle veut objective et équilibrée. Notre pays est convaincu que la sécurité d'Israël peut se construire dans une zone pacifiée où chacun trouve sa place, concède mais reçoit. La Belgique se réjouit que vous partagiez les convictions ici avancées avec l'espoir que les négociations de paix aboutiront sans délai, permettant à un État palestinien démocratique, souverain, viable et pacifique de prendre enfin sa destinée en main. L'Europe, ce continent que vous connaissez bien pour y être né et y avoir vécu votre enfance, l'Europe a un rôle important à jouer au Proche-Orient. La paix marche sur deux pieds, un pied politique et un pied économique. L'expression est de vous. En disant cela, vous pensiez à l'Europe. Et l'Europe peut faire plus et mieux pour aider les uns et les autres à retrouver le chemin de la paix. Sans doute faut-il être poète plus que politique pour affirmer que la vocation de la négociation, c'est l'inventivité plus encore que le marchandage. C'est de trouver une solution étonnante à laquelle personne n'avait pensé. Ce n'est pas seulement à l'homme politique que je m'adresse, mais aussi aux brillants intellectuels. Pour vous, seule l'éducation peut guérir tous les maux du siècle. Monsieur Shimon Peres, vous appelez de tous vos vœux un Proche-Orient nouveau, ouvert et prospère. Vous gardez plus que jamais un regard prophétique sur les événements qui déchirent cette partie du monde qui nous est si chère. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous espérons que l'accord de Charm-El-Cheikh sera respecté et qu'il permettra l'établissement d'un climat propice à la reprise du dialogue, permettant une négociation qui, elle-même, sera, cette fois, productrice d'une solution durable. Mr. Prime Minister, we will listen with the utmost attention to your speech, and may I invite you to take the floor. Chers collègues, avant de donner la parole au Premier ministre, je vous signale que le Premier ministre a accepté de répondre à vos questions et je vous propose dès lors de les poser brièvement. Je crois qu'une minute doit suffire pour chacun d'entre vous, ce qui permettra, Monsieur le Premier ministre, de vous répondre. Mr. Prime Minister.
Mr. President, Senators, members of the Parliament, I want to thank you so much for your kind words and your hope for the future and for this very kind reception. It is a real privilege to address the illustrious body in this magnificent chamber. Today, Belgium is a model of cooperation between communities of different cultures and backgrounds. Maybe more than any other European country, Belgium's national future is linked to that of Europe. In the present post-industrial world, where frontiers are no more dividing lines between nations, Belgium hosts the institutions of Europe, the European Union, not by chance, but because history and geography made it a natural site for the implementation of the great ideas of Schuman, Monet, and Henry Spaak. Belgium will soon assume the presidency of the Union and will undoubtedly contribute to how best shape the future of an enlarged democratic European continent at peace and also the peace process in the Middle East. In a recent pragmatic speech on the future of Europe, your Prime Minister quoted the famous Hölderlin by saying, "Man is a god when he dreams, but a beggar when he thinks." The Prime Minister concluded that the European Union needs to be guided to its final destination by both gods and beggars, both dreamers and thinkers. Vision, political courage, and a strong determination not to let fear dictate the relations among people were the major ingredients of the European success. They are the same basic ingredients which one day will make peace possible in the Middle East. May I say, Mr. President, that we learn very much from Europe. I know that some of our European friends say, well, America is conducting the peace and you didn't let very much for the European role. It's not true. The United States helps us to mark the borders among the different countries in the Middle East. Europe teaches us how to introduce new relations. And in the world we live today, relations are more important than borders. Borders were important when the world was basically living on an agrarian economy. Land was the source of strength and wealth, no longer. Today, the source of strength and wealth are the brains, the science, the technologies, the information, and they do not have borders. We live in a world actually without real borders. The information, the dangers, the hopes are not touching the ground of the land, but floating in the space and the air and making us one world without islands, without separations, without differences or taboos. Europe was the first to do so. You know, now the situation in the Middle East is not a very happy one. It looks like the skies are full of clouds, and many people say, well, again. When I'm coming to Europe, I remember always that in 31 short years, from 1914 to 1945, Europe went through two terrible wars, world wars. Europe has lost, in addition to the Shoah, to the Jewish tragedy, Europe has lost 50 million people. Many young Europeans lost their eyes, their ears, their hands, their legs, their families, their future. And these 30 years of bloodshed and hatred and disagreements and accusations and threats were preceded by a history of division, of wars, of misunderstanding, of coalition, of hostilities. And if somebody would stand up, say in 1944, and say, ladies and gentlemen, in a short while of 2 or 3 years, you will see a new Europe emerging, a Europe without hatred, a Europe without wars, a Europe without differences, everybody would be laughing. And look what happened. I believe that the same potential may exist in the Middle East too. It is not by accident that Europe all of a sudden went over from a continent of war to a continent of prosperity and hope. I think there are basically 2 reasons for it. One, because in the depth of the human mind, there is an extremely strong desire for peace that maybe in political terms were not expressed by the leaders or by the headlines. Leaders were looking for glory and victories, and people quietly were looking for a different life. There is a tremendous potential hidden, unknown, in the midst of our life, trying to achieve peace, particularly now, when even a young man or young women attend television and see that people can live differently. You don't have to kill, you don't have to be killed, you don't have to be stopped at the border. And there is a tremendous potential for peace that we, the leaders, do not know always how to discover it fully on time. And the second thing is that we have discovered with the new economy, which Europe is heading together with the United States, that the human potential exceeds by far the material potential. What you have in the human making promises you much more hope and possibilities than all of the treasures hidden in the land and embedded in the known economy. You know, we reach a time where actually almost 5% of humanity will be sufficient to supply all of our material needs. And when you look at modern economies, you discover that there is more and more cultural consumption than material one. The great companies of our time are companies of entertainment, of music, of tourism, more than to supply the daily needs. And also that the real story of our time is not the size of your land, but the speed of your action. The faster you are, the richer you are becoming, because you save time and material and capital and intermediaries and complications, and it's a new age. I'm not a prophet, but I can say with certainty, there is no need for war. Maybe there will be wars. When we are living on our land, we have had to fight for the land, defend it or extend it. Today we don't have to do it. I mean, if you want to be rich, go to the school. Don't go to the battlefield. Enable your children to educate. And if you want to be a strong country, develop a strong educational system. We are living in an ancient region that is still very much attuned to the land, to the material side of life. And nobody will wait for us to join in modern economy. Nobody will pay for our blindness or retardedness or mistakes. It's an open world, either you join it in or not. I speak with great respect about Belgium because I know you have a problem with different ethnic groups of languages, and you weren't satisfied just with the Flame and the Wallon language. You want also to add the German language. Why not? And you have parliamentarians that are serving in different capacities. But this is a good example. How can we remain pluralistic without overriding one the right of the other? For me, democracy means two things. The right to be equal, but the equal right to be different. Belgium is a demonstration that diversity and difference can coexist in one land without killing the traditions or the language or the respect of anybody because it belongs to a different group of people. Our neighbors are the Palestinians and the Arabs. The late Prime Minister Rabin and myself went to Oslo, not because of military reasons and not because of political planning. We went to correct a mistake. The Jewish people are 4,000 years old. Never in our history did we dominate another people. The people who have dominated us disappeared from history. We don't want to follow them. We found ourselves dominating the Palestinian people. We thought this is a mistake. We shouldn't do it. We went to Oslo not only to make our neighbors free and independent, but also us free from being a dominating people. We don't want to be a dominating people. The Jewish history started in Egypt when Moses escaped the house of slaves, not in order to build a house of masters, but a house of equal people. And for us to see the Palestinians equal in every town is part of our own tradition and concept. It is not a simple proposition. There was a history of mistrust, of prejudice, which goes on to this very day. It's not over. And in the background of the political complication, there is also the historic division in religious terms, for example, concerning Jerusalem. The old city of Jerusalem is not more than 800 square meters. But in those 800 square meters, you have an investment of 3,000 years of Jewish history, of 2,000 years of Christian history, of 1,400 years of Muslim history. Now nobody can monopolize the history of the other. When it comes to politics, we can make compromises. When it comes to religion, we have to share, we have to coexist, we have to respect each other. We have to allow every prayer pray in his own way, in his own tradition, to make sure that all churches and mosques and synagogues will remain intact, not facing any dangers, to secure them without intervening in their worshipping, without sending police into the mosques or the churches or the synagogues. Since Oslo, 7 years have passed. It wasn't easy years, but let's face it. If you want to do something great in history, you must be prepared to meet great quarrels and great confrontations. You must be prepared to negotiate hurdles and misunderstandings and failures and setbacks. It is not a promenade in a garden of roses. And if people ask me if I'm pessimistic, no. I feel that we have to negotiate the difficulties. I think the main difficulty now is really the religious one concerning Jerusalem. I think we have agreed on most of the issues. I think the difference in territorial terms are minor, maybe a difference of 1 or 2% from what we are offering and what the Palestinians are expecting. I think the future too is not so much in a dispute. Finally, we think that the Palestinians are entitled and should have a state of their own, an independent state, be responsible for their own life. I think economically too, we did begin to understand, again following your example, that maybe the best solution is to have a sort of a Benelux with open borders. Let's keep your tradition, yet let's keep your identity, let's keep your language. But when it comes to the flow of ideas, of goods, and today we produce more ideas than goods. Goods are unimportant. 50 or 60 years ago, agriculture was maybe 50% of the economy. Today it's 1%. On the other hand, tourism, that was almost nothing, is today 20%. It's a changing world. And unless you have open borders, and you will permit the water, the electricity, the tourists, the information to flow uninterruptedly, and even when you have the dangers today, we went over from a world of enemies to a world of dangers. When you ask yourself what are the dangers of our time, well, pollution, for example, you cannot stop it on the border. Terror, you cannot stop it on the border. Even missiles, you cannot stop on the border. Narcotics, you cannot stop on the border. And the infrastructure must flow with the same speed as the world economy. And all governments today are too small to handle the world economy. Even the United States does not control the world economy. And we have reached the point of Jerusalem. I think that whatever we have agreed should be implemented. Whatever we did not agree, we have to continue to negotiate. We cannot impose upon the Palestinians our views. They cannot impose upon us their views. And if you have a problem without a solution, you don't have a problem. Because only problems that can be solved are problems. If you don't have a way to solve them, go ahead and continue to negotiate. Because negotiation is not bargaining. Negotiation is the art of creativity, to find solutions that were until now unknown, undiscovered. And if you find it today, try tomorrow. Be patient. I came here really because we have much respect, not only for Belgium, but for the famous Belgium compromise, the famous Belgium model, the way you are handling your differences, which are not easy, and I know they are not easy. And whoever tries, a famous author said one, whoever tries to kill a language is like throwing a nuclear bomb on the Louvre in Paris. Don't kill languages. don't kill cultures, respect them. And also because Belgium is going to assume now the presidency of the European Union. And also because we have a traditional understanding between Belgium and Israel. And by the way, we appreciate the Belgian-friendly relation with the Arab countries. We don't suggest that friendship with Israel should be on the account of lack of friendship with the Arabs. We too want to be friendly with the Arabs. The main point today is really to support peace with tolerance, with patience, with a vision, with the courage, not to let the passing clouds on the sky to become as the color of our life. Again and again, we know that every morning a new sun can shine for all of us. And we have mornings, not just evenings. It is to the new dawn that we are looking, and I hope we shall work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your speech and your message full of wisdom and of hope. You accepted to answer the questions of the members of the Parliament, of the Senate and of the House who are here, even some of the European Parliament. Donc je vais donner la parole tout d'abord à Monsieur Mahou, président du groupe socialiste.
Monsieur le Premier ministre, merci pour votre message de paix. Nous sommes nombreux, depuis de très nombreuses années, effectivement, ici en Belgique, à lutter pour la paix dans le respect des droits du peuple palestinien et le droit à la sécurité d'Israël. C'est la raison d'ailleurs pour laquelle j'ai demandé dans le dialogue à notre président de pouvoir recevoir aussi le président Arafat. Je voudrais vous poser deux questions. La première, c'est que nous comprenons difficilement la politique de poursuite des implantations de colonies de peuplement depuis quelques années, puisqu'on constate que quand il y a conflit, c'est souvent une des origines du conflit. Et donc, si vous me permettez, j'aimerais avoir votre avis par rapport à cette politique qui, dans le processus de paix, pose problème. Et la deuxième, peut-être parce que nous avons ratifié, notre Parlement a ratifié l'accord de coopération euro-méditerranéen avec Israël, et nous l'avons fait en nous interrogeant sur le sort qui était réservé aux produits palestiniens qui étaient exportés, et sur le statut de ces produits palestiniens, parce que nous avons eu l'attention attirée sur le fait que l'obligation pour ces produits de transiter par Israël causait des problèmes et était un obstacle au développement économique qui est nécessaire aussi à l'intérieur des territoires occupés. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Les politiques du gouvernement actuel en Israël s'est arrêté complètement d'établissement de nouveaux implantations. Y a-t-il une résolution par les gouvernements précédents qui légalement nous ne pouvons pas arrêter? C'est-à-dire il y avait une partie que nous avons arrêtée, mais il y avait une autre partie que nous n'avons pas le droit à arrêter. Mais comme en politique, nous sommes contre la continuation des politiques d'implantation. C'est terminé. Pour le passage des matériels ou des produits palestiniens par Israël, nous avons arrivé vers un accord sur les passages sûrs, sécures, et c'est commencé à travailler. Malheureusement, le dernier événement a arrêté cet agrément, mais je suis sûr que nous pouvons continuer immédiatement après que nous gagnons la tranquillité, encore une fois.
Je donne maintenant la parole à Monsieur le ministre d'État Marc Eskens, député, ancien Premier ministre et ancien ministre des Affaires étrangères.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister, for your inspiring and moving message. Of course, the situation in the Near East and in your country is extremely critical. And I have a question as far as the role of a possible peacekeeping or peacemaking force is concerned. Of course, we have today on the spot some peacekeeping forces of the United Nations called FINUL, but everybody knows that its role has been extremely inefficient and its mandate extremely vague. In Europe, in the European Union, we try now to define and to elaborate a more credible foreign policy. Do you think the moment has arrived for the European Union to negotiate and eventually to propose the sending of a peacekeeping force to the region in order to calm down the situation and give new room for negotiations in a pacified atmosphere? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to see you again. We are old friends. I'm very much in doubt that an international force can replace the need for an agreement between the two parties. If we shall not agree, the international force will be inutile. You know, the United Nations forces don't have the right to use their arms. It's an army that doesn't shoot. An international force will hardly understand who is who and who is where. What we really need is a full agreement. Looking at the future, there is no alternative but to reach an understanding between the Palestinians and us. This is the best guarantee. But Europe can do a great deal by establishing branches of the European economy in the Palestinian territory, in the Jordanian territory, to promote the standard of living. I think that by the present economy, poverty will prevail. There is no way to escape poverty without the introduction of high technology, of modern economy. No way. And if our neighbors will remain poor, there will be bitterness and misunderstandings. What you did in Europe actually was to economize your policies instead of politicizing your economy. And what we need in the Middle East is exactly the same. To economize our policies, to open the borders, to open the eyes, and to see there is a new set of rules and norms. And Europe eventually, I think, is indicating that you will be ready to associate 4 countries in the Middle East, Egypt, Jordan, the Palestinians, and us, with the European Union. I think it will be a great day. And I think this is the future. But when I envisage our relations with the Arabs, it must be based on understandings, not on force. An understanding that makes force unnecessary, because force cannot replace understandings. Thank you.
La parole est à Madame Nagy, présidente du groupe écologiste.
Mr. Prime Minister, I would like to thank you for the very hopeful words that you have told you today. Je suis consciente de la difficulté d'obtenir la paix au Moyen-Orient et je suis particulièrement honorée de pouvoir m'adresser au Prix Nobel de la paix qu'il a reçu avec M. Arafat et M. Rabin, qui lui a payé de sa vie pour son engagement pour la paix. Je regrette cependant, comme beaucoup d'autres Européens, que le retard dans les négociations, dans l'aboutissement des accords d'Oslo et dans la mise en œuvre des résolutions des Nations Unies amène à la situation de violence que vous rencontrez aujourd'hui. Alors, l'urgence, bien entendu, des blocages actuels et l'espoir de l'aboutissement de la trêve de cette semaine ne doivent pas nous faire oublier peut-être des enjeux à plus moyen terme. Et je pense en particulier à la question du retour des réfugiés palestiniens. Quel est votre point de vue à ce sujet? Et comment est-ce que vous pouvez envisager, je dirais, la reprise de ce processus de paix sans des conditions politiques tellement contraignantes que les Palestiniens ne ne puisse accepter de reprendre une négociation correcte avec Israël?
Well, I shall answer your question very frankly and very honestly. There are 24 countries in the Middle East. 23 are Arabs, 1 is Jewish. What makes an Arab country Arab and what makes a Jewish country Jewish? Only the majority. We are a Jewish state because the majority are Jews. If you shall lose the majority, it will stop being a Jewish state. Now, as a result of war and hatred, there was movements of people. 650,000 Jewish people left the Arab countries and came to Israel. And I don't know exactly the number, but also quite a large group of Palestinians left Israel, not upon our pressure, to other Arab countries. Territorially speaking, the Middle East is 10 million square kilometers. Israel is only 24,000 square kilometers, including the West Bank and Gaza. On those 24,000 kilometers, we have today 9 million people. 4 million are Arabs, 5 million are Jews. If you will add 1 million more to Israel, we shall stop being a Jewish state. And we have the right to be Jewish, as the Palestinians and the Arabs have the right to be Arabs. So when it comes to the reunion of families, we say yes. When it comes to compensation, we say yes. But when it comes to bring an end to the Jewish state, we say no. This is the whole story, if you want. And I don't know how many of the refugees really want to come back. It's the second generation and third generation. We suggested many times that a survey will be done among the refugees to find out how many of them are willing to come back. Nobody knows exactly. And they are dispersed like the Jewish people all over the world. You have Palestinians in South America, you have in Europe, you have in Australia, all over the world. I'm not so sure that they want to come back, as not all of the Jewish people want to come back. But basically, the limit of it is us guarding our majority. There was a Christian state in the Middle East by the name of Lebanon. Now, the friends of the Christians in Lebanon committed a mistake. They have added a piece of Syria to Lebanon under the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and that has reduced the Christian majority to a point where Lebanon is no longer a Christian state. So we have just one Jewish state. The Jewish people went through a terrible history. And when you want to go back, the Palestinians say we were here before, and we say we were here before. It's an endless story, because how long are you ready to go back? 20 years, 200 years, 2,000 years. It's endless. We have to look forward. And forward we have to understand that the Arabs will remain Arab countries and we shall remain a Jewish country. Thank you.
La parole est à Madame Muyam, présidente du groupe social-chrétien.
Je voudrais d'abord vous remercier pour l'élévation de votre exposé, parce que je trouve que non seulement vous avez fait preuve de sagesse, mais aussi d'une vision extraordinairement optimiste de l'homme, et avec tout ce que vous avez vécu, pour nous c'est un grand témoignage. Je voulais vous poser une question concernant ce que vous avez souligné être une question capitale, c'est celle du statut de Jérusalem. Vous avez souligné dans votre exposé l'importance de cette problématique. J'aurais voulu savoir plus concrètement, vous en avez parlé, comment vous voyez les choses. Est-ce que la solution se trouve éventuellement dans une souveraineté partagée, dans une extraterritorialité, dans une internationalisation de la ville? Comment voyez-vous les choses très concrètement? Je sais bien que je suis là au cœur du problème, mais j'aurais voulu avoir votre vision sur le sujet. Merci.
There are two Jerusalems. There is the geographic Jerusalem and there is the historic Jerusalem. The geographic Jerusalem is a matter of politics. And I think the Prime Minister of Israel, Mr. Barak, at Camp David, made a very generous offer how to redivide or reunite Jerusalem based on the demographic approach, namely, in those parts of Jerusalem where the Palestinians are majority, it will go to the Palestinians. In those parts where the Jews are majorities, will become a Jewish state. When it came to the holy city and the Temple Mount, which is the historic heart and the religious heart, President Clinton has offered sharing the places. That was rejected by the Palestinians. And as I have said, I cannot imagine a solution of a monopoly. Nobody will accept a monopoly. Neither the Palestinians, nor the Jews, nor the Christians. Now, the paradox in Jerusalem is that pragmatically there is not so much of a problem. The problem is how to define it in writing. Because when it comes to the two important mosques of the Muslims are running it without any intervention of Israel, nothing whatsoever. It's under a Palestinian authority, the Waqf. And then Israel provides security in between the places. For example, when you have Fridays where maybe 300,000 or 400,000 people are coming to pray, to guarantee the order so it won't be an overflow of conflicts. The Jewish position on Temple Mount is a little bit of a complication, because the religious people say we should not go there or settle there before the Messiah will arrive. And you know, when it comes to the Messiah, we don't have a fixed day. He is probably the best diplomat we have because he has never arrived, and so the press is very kind to him. But it's not a fixed date. So in fact, we live together. But when you want to define it, then we have a lot of troubles. So I say, you know what, let's continue to live the way we live. I don't suggest to postpone the question, but I say let's continue to negotiate. Maybe a brilliant idea will arrive. Maybe new letters will be discovered. Maybe under a different mood, we can find different solutions. Because, you know, every problem or every solution is also a matter of age. Things that we are doing today was impossible to do 7 years ago, before Oslo. It's like in your family, if a girl at the age of 4 will say she wants to get married, everybody will laugh. But if she shall reach the age of 24 and she'll say so, well, it's quite reasonable. So let's also age play the role of maturing. And we should not be impatient. It's a very old city. We were waiting for such a long time. So don't come and say, if we won't settle it in a month's time, we shall begin to shoot. It doesn't sound reasonable to my ears. Thank you.
Je donne la parole à Monsieur Mohamed Daïf, du groupe socialiste.
Oui, Monsieur le Président. À mon tour, je remercie Monsieur le Premier ministre pour son discours qui était très humaniste et très touchant. Je ne vais pas être beaucoup plus long, mais vous avez dit qu'il faut vivre dans le respect quand il s'agit de matières culturelles, de matières religieuses notamment. Je vous pose la question la suivante. Que pensez-vous de la visite provocatrice de M. Ariel Sharon au mont d'Esplanade, de la mosquée Al-Aqsa? Je vous remercie.
Well, you know, misunderstandings play a very important role in politics. I believe that Ariel Sharon paid a visit to the Temple Mount with an eye on the domestic Israeli situation, very little to do with the Palestinian side. And by law, every citizen of Israel can visit the Temple Mount. The government cannot stop it, even if his name is Sharon or any other name. But when Sharon went, and the government thought that he may be in danger, he was provided with a guard, which is natural. Now, some of our Palestinian neighbors saw it on television, and they were shocked. I assure you, nobody planned the visit of Sharon in order to create a provocation. I tend to believe that Sharon did it because he has his own ways and consideration within his own party, and it was, I believe, more a demonstration toward the Israeli public opinion than to the Palestinian one. But many of the Palestinians are convinced that this was a planned provocation. May I say that none of us is so perfect to plan such a provocation, and if we are perfect, we clearly wouldn't do it. What for? To introduce disturbances and hatred and violence doesn't make any sense. So in my judgment, it is a case of misunderstanding and not a case of planning. And for that reason, we are very happy that in Sjarm-El-Sjeik, they've agreed to have a fact-finding mechanism. I am sure that the fact-finding will discover the real story. We have nothing to hide and nothing to cover.
Ik geef nu het woord aan meneer Van Krunkelsven, voorzitter van de Volksunie-fractie.
Mr. Prime Minister, I'm here. I was very impressed by your speech and the high respect you showed for different cultures and languages. You stressed the importance of economical equality for peace as a condition for peace, and you spoke about the role of economy in Europe, in the history of Europe. Now my question, nowadays Palestinians are very dependent on Israeli economy and are dependent on the economy in Israel. They are coming work there and etc. My question, can we as Europe help to correct this situation? For instance, by aid to the regions where Palestinians are living nowadays, and how we can manage it?
I have nothing against it. I'm all for it. Our concept is very clear. The better the Palestinians will have it, a better neighbor we shall have. But when you talk about assistance, I mean, we shouldn't repeat the mistake of foreign aid only. You know, foreign aid has had its failures. You took the money of the poor people in the rich countries and you gave it to the rich people in the poor countries. Occasionally you created more corruption than aid. What you have to do is to introduce modern economy. It's not a problem of money, it's a problem of economy. Today it is not what you have had or you are going to have, but to develop the potential. You know, all companies in the world today are being judged by their potential, not by their accumulation. Now the Palestinians have today 10 universities with maybe 50 or 60,000 students. I think they should be the first group to be approached and enable their graduates to build high technologies, to build software. And I think it's also important for Europe. Europe spends so much money to fight unemployment. With the same money, you could have invested in creating new opportunities for investment. The Arab world is 300 million people. The standard of living there is in between $1,000 to $2,000 per capita. So if you have 300 million people, maybe it's $300 billion market or $400 million market. If you will double it, you will have 600 to 700. And if you reach even the lowest European standard, say $13,000 or $14,000, you have a new market. So we are all for it. And I think the introduction of an open economy, the building of an infrastructure which has a modern nature would be the best investment. And I think Europe can do here miracles. You know, and you have to do it as governments and companies, because I don't believe that globalization is an ideology. I think globalization is the result that we went over from the economy of the land to the economy of the brains, and brains don't have borders. So it's privatization, it's not an ideology. Because if the economy became global and the governments remained national, the governments didn't have a choice but to hand over the economy to private people and private companies. The results are complicated, because what is privatization? Everything that makes money goes to private hands, and everything that costs money remains in the hands of the governments. So all governments are in deficits, and all companies are in surplus. Now, I have nothing against it, but I think the companies will do rightly and wisely, since they are becoming multinational companies, that they will participate in extinction of the political fires. When companies were national, they spend money on insurance against physical dangers. Today, when they are international, they have to spend money for political insurance against political catastrophes. And I think when I'm speaking about Europe, I'm not just referring to the European governments, but also to the European business, NGOs. And I think they can do, together with the government, together with the European Union, a great job for the future.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. I know that our Prime Minister will meet you at 1:45, so I will now give the floor to the two last colleagues who would like to raise a question, and maybe you could answer to the two questions together. Het woord is aan meneer Colla, voorzitter van de Commissie Buitenlandse Zaken. La parole est à monsieur Colla, président de la Commission des Affaires étrangères.
Mr. Prime Minister, I thank you very much that you are willing to answer our questions. I have a political question. I am very well aware of the difficult situation of Mr. Barak regarding the political situation in the Knesset. But the announcement, that fact, of a possible coalition government with Likud, is that not considered as a major obstacle regarding the chances of the future peace process?
Het woord, 1 minute, the second question. Mevrouw de Bethune, ondervoorzitter van de Senaat. Madame de Bethune, vice-présidente du Sénat.
Dank u, voorzitter. Normalement, nous exprimons en néerlandais, mais je parlerai bien sûr en français. Monsieur n'a pas de...
Ja, meneer, de eerste minister heeft dus een...
Dank u.
De vertaling is...
Je voulais vous dire au nom de mon groupe combien nous sommes impressionnés par votre travail pour une paix juste et stable au Moyen-Orient. Et vous avez dit des paroles très profondes sur la paix. Et si je peux faire une dissension, je voudrais dire, j'ai constaté récemment, il y a un éditeur français qui sort une série de livres pour les enfants, où des auteurs célèbres, des philosophes, des artistes, des politiques, parlent de sujets difficiles aux enfants. La mort expliquée aux enfants, la maladie expliquée. Je crois que vous devriez écrire un petit livre, La paix expliquée aux enfants. Vous nous avez parlé à des grandes personnes, mais je crois que vous pourriez expliquer ces choses-là à des enfants et que ce serait important. Et ma question est dans le prolongement de ce constat. À votre avis, le processus de paix au Moyen-Orient, pour nous, c'est une négociation entre chefs politiques, chefs religieux, entre chefs. Quel est le rôle de la société civile dans ce processus, ou quel pourrait être son rôle, que ce soit justement les mouvements de citoyens, les mouvements de femmes, et les images des conflits qui ont repris il y a quelque temps. On a été frappé par cette terrible image d'enfants tués qui ont fait rebondir ces événements et qui sont quand même les premières victimes aussi de ces troubles. Comment pouvons-nous expliquer ce processus aux enfants, mais aussi et aux citoyens normaux, aux gens qui subissent ces événements, et comment est-ce qu'ils peuvent eux aussi être impliqués dans ce processus de paix et de dialogue?
To the question, Barak is in a difficult situation because the very generous offers he made in Camp David cost him support in the parliament. And then the rejection of those offers cost him another prize. Now the discussion in Israel is about building an emergency government. The best way to save it is to bring an end to the emergency. If there won't be an emergency, we do not need an emergency government. Then I believe that even if there will be a national union government or an emergency government, we shall probably have elections in the next year. The problem before Barak, his party, his government, is if he can go to the election with an agreement with the Palestinians or not. If he will come empty-handed, he is in danger. I'm speaking politically. If he will come with an agreement, I think he can make it. And I'm telling to our Palestinian partner, please be careful. We have missed already one opportunity in 1996, after the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin. I replaced him, and I have implemented what we call the Oslo B. Namely, we gave back to the Palestinians 500 villages and 7 cities. And then a terrible terror broke out in Israel, in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Ashkelon. Tens of innocent people were killed in the buses. And as a result, I lost the elections. It was just a few weeks before the elections. As a result, another government was elected and another policy was introduced, and 3 years were wasted. We should not create now another missing opportunity. And I'm also referring to the Palestinians. We are probably very near elections, and if before the people will not be a choice for peace, I can foresee the results of the elections. So this is the real dilemma before us. The dilemma, to say it briefly, is not the composition of the government, but the content of its policies. And we would like very much to be in a position to introduce a peace policy. Now to your question, I think the civil society can play an extremely important role. I think that the idea of people to people, namely children to children, young people to young people, working together on theater, on music, on television, on meeting. We now introduce a connection among schools, Palestinians and Israelis, to the internet and the computers. Because if you have email, electronic mail, and if you have e-commerce, electronic commerce, why not have e-peace, electronic peace? The electronics can really serve a great deal to create links and understanding directly among the people, dodging over governments, dodging over languages, dodging over prejudices, and speak directly one to another. This is a very great hope and a worthwhile cause to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for your speech, for the kindness with which you answered the questions of our colleagues. Merci beaucoup pour le temps que vous nous avez consacré. Vous aurez constaté, Monsieur le Premier ministre, que la démarche et l'approche de la Belgique par rapport aux problèmes au Proche-Orient se veut mesurée, objective et équilibrée. Et je voudrais vous assurer que notre pays sera toujours présent pour prêter ses bons offices à toute mission de paix dans votre région. Merci beaucoup pour votre venue.